Welcome to Alaska EdVenture, Lessons from the K-12 Frontier, with your host, Dr. Meinert, Superintendent of the Fairbanks North Starborough School District. This podcast is your gateway to the heart of Alaska's educational landscape, where each episode features guests sharing their unique perspectives. We are bringing together voices that shape education in the last frontier. Join us as we explore the challenges, triumphs, and innovations in Alaska's K-12 classrooms.
All right, welcome back to the Alaska EdVenture podcast. I'm Dr. Luke Meinert, the superintendent of the Fairbanks North Starborough School District and host of this wonderful podcast. And so lucky to have a couple of our Fairbanks North Starborough school teachers with me today. And we're going to talk about Walk to Read. It's something that we've talked a little bit about in the past when we've talked about our literacy efforts here in Fairbanks, and Walk to Read is certainly a big part of that. And so I'm just so excited to have Jessica Weber and Nicole Krenzke with me today to talk about Walk to Read and how it's playing out in their schools. And before we get to that, I want each of them to tell a little bit about themselves and their background.
I'm Nicole Krenzke. I've been teaching at Ticasuk for 18 years.
My name is Jessica Weber, and I've been teaching first grade at Midnight Sun for 14 years.
Excellent.
We both attended North Pole area schools, graduated from UAF, and we're raising our kids here, and this community's home.
And actually, fun fact, we met on the bus going to Badger Road Elementary School way back in the day.
Oh my goodness, that's super awesome. I was on a bus today with some little guys and thinking about, if I met somebody, and then 13 years down the road, here we are.
Yep.
So, well, thank you so much for everything that you do in our schools on a daily basis, and then your willingness to come in and talk about Walk to Read. Also, thank you for being on our IDEA team. For those that have listened to the podcast in the past, our IDEA team has helped greatly with our literacy efforts this year and shaping and focusing the direction of our literacy efforts and really creating resources for both our teachers and our community to use to help support our students and our teachers. And so a huge lift with the IDEA team, and just thank you for both of you for being such a big part of that. And so let's dive in. Can you give a basic overview of what Walk to Read is and how we're using it in your schools?
So Walk to Read is using test scores from things like Mclass or other classroom data to group students based on their reading abilities and their skills. And then it gives teachers time to provide intervention and enrichment to those kids depending on those test scores and what they need.
Cool. So in education, we have a lot of different acronyms, different things we say. And so when you say Mclass, what do you mean by Mclass?
So Mclass is the screener, the diagnostic assessment that is being used by the state of Alaska as part of the AK Reads Act to just sort of see where kids are, what level they're at. There's different sub-tests. So you might see kids sounding out of words, like individual letter sounds, blending it together into a word, and then they get into like reading fluency, where they're reading like a story, and you're getting a word count of how many words in a minute they read and how accurately they do it.
Okay, great. Anything to add into that, or?
I think Nicole did a great job describing
Perfect.
it.
I think she did too, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to add on to that. And so you guys are experts in elementary education. Why do we care so much about literacy with our young ones?
Because learning to read is such a vital thing to do at a young age. Like if we can teach our kids to read in kindergarten, first and second grade, where we are learning to read, it will help their academic success in the future when the switch turns from learning to read to reading to learn. So if we can get them on grade level with the decoding and the fluency and the accuracy, then when they go to read a grade level text about science or social studies in the future, they won't be struggling over the ability to read. They'll be learning the new content.
Excellent. There's been a lot of talk about the science of reading, both here in Alaska and nationally, as states and school districts are looking to improve reading scores. So how does that show up in the curriculum and the way that you approach instruction, and then specifically in Walk to Read?
So in the curriculum, like our adopted language arts curriculum is the HMH into reading, which follows the science of reading, focuses on the big five. So phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, focuses on those skills. So you're working on those during that core block. And then those skills spill over into the walk to read time. So we're using, state or district adopted approved interventions, things like UFly, and those follow that science of reading approach. So you're focusing on those big five of reading during that walk to read time as well.
Excellent. And yeah, you mentioned UFly. One of my favorite moments still is from this year when I got put to work and got to play a UFly game.
Yeah.
And so UFly, I'm just so impressed every time I see it in the classroom with the pacing and the engagement of students. And I don't know, I feel like it reaches students in a different way than past approaches that we've had. And so it was super fun to interact with a student in one of those UFly games that we got to play.
That was fun. I love UFly because it does keep a nice peppy pace. And I feel like that's what we need to keep the kids going. And there's also those really fun games that they feel like they're getting a break in practicing, but they're not really getting.
No, they're not. It definitely reinforces those skills. And so that's great. So when does Walk to Read happen in your schools?
Both at Midnight Sun and Ticasuk, we walk to read 4 days a week for 30 minutes. So it all depends on, so we walk Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday because of our meeting day is Thursday. So it all kind of works out with our schedule. So we walk 4 days a week for 30 minutes, but there are schools in the district that walk 5 days a week and some even walk for 40 to 45 minutes. So it all depends on how the school can make it fit inside their schedule.
Excellent. And you talked a little bit about how students were assessed using the Mclass screener, but how does that look logistically? I mean, you've got the screener results, and then what happens next after that?
So we get in grade level teams like PLCs, all the second grade teachers, or we meet with like grade level bands. So at Ticasuk, second and third grade walk together. So the second and third grade teachers get together, and it looks like there's a lot of chocolate on the table. And we just have like a giant spreadsheet and we plug through those scores and these 15 kids really need, they have this in common. They really need this. And that can be what they get during Walk to Read. Whereas these 25 are really excelling and really doing well and they need some enrichment. So we're going to throw that in with like some chapter books that we normally wouldn't have time for. So it's grade level teams of teachers and like cross grade levels working together and really looking at that data and figuring out what kids need and what intervention we have and how we can best then support it.
Excellent. And so when students are distributed to groups, are they in those groups for the rest of the year or how does that work?
No, that's like the great thing about Walk to Read is nothing is set in stone. It's very fluid. And we make a point to meet once a month with the two grade levels together. But we've even moved kids between those monthly meetings. And I think it's coming up in a question later, but like the Walk to Read really helps teachers with the relationships and that whole idea of like, these are all of our kids and we're all working together. And when you're sharing kids like that, you're talking about them and, hey, Johnny is really increasing. I think he's ready to move up and we can just easily make those changes and let's start Monday and he'll be in that new group and we'll watch it for 2 weeks and see what happens. So, they can move. And then 3 times a year when we do the big benchmark testings, then that's when we kind of make bigger shifts to the groups. But, a kid moving here or there is totally normal. And it's a great thing of those flexible groups. Yeah.
And I do love that culture and climate piece that you're building through the whole school participating in it. And just like the relationships that are built that you wouldn't normally maybe get to build with students that aren't in your classroom.
Right.
Can you share some maybe success stories of students that you've seen already that have worked through the Walk to Read process in your schools this year?
Absolutely. I have a great story actually this year. I had a kiddo who they didn't go to kindergarten. So they came to me and they were very far behind, like didn't know how to write her name independently. And as a first grade teacher, that's a little scary. But with Walk to Read and small group intervention, she is excelling. And now she went from well below to just below. She's still below, but like huge growth. Now she can sound out CVC words. She can write words. Like she's a whole different kid than she was at the beginning of the year. And I don't think that would have happened if they didn't have that focused 30 minutes in a small group. I couldn't have done that in the classroom. I could have tried, but it wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love a lot of people get hung up on the specific score and get hung up on, well, that student's not proficient. But really, a lot of times I'm interested in that growth trajectory. And like at the end of the day, that's what's important, is to ensure that students continue to grow and we'll get them there, right? But I just love that you pointed that out, and it looks like it's being successful for that student and many of our students in the district. And we are showing growth among all of our grade bands, which is excellent, and in the proficiency levels as well too. So having more and more students reach into being proficient. So any success stories at your school?
Yeah, it was hard to pick. No, I have one kiddo who started the year reading 13 words a minute, which is kind of, as at the beginning of second grade, that's kind of one of those, all right, what are we going to do? We really need to watch this because that's pretty low. And then she's been using UFly and Walk to Read, and her, just her knowledge of phonics and like phonics rules and patterns, and has just, she can like teach the class when we start like working on like heart words and, you know, the vowel team that you need to know by heart, or the part of it that, you know, isn't sound outable, and the different rules and different ways of doing that. Her knowledge is just amazing. So she's up to like the 60 words a minute range, which is kind of that beginning of the year goal, but just thinking that she's grown 50 plus words over the course of the school year is really good growth. And that it's not just in that fluency, like all of the background skills to get there are growing really well too.
Well, that's super impressive. Thank you for sharing that story. We've talked a little bit about Walk to Read being an intervention program, but also I heard the word enrichment in there. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that's been successful for students as an enrichment piece?
So we often talk about it with intervention, but also, you know, we've got 25 or 40 kids reading, you know, above grade level in terms of like oral reading goals. So we actually have 2 enrichment groups happening. One's a little bit a higher level, working with like full on chapter books, and doing like partner reading those stories, and then doing really deep dives into comprehension and vocabulary skills with that. And then we have a slightly lower group, but still meeting and exceeding expectations. And they're diving really deep into some picture books. So still just getting to read different books, working on that comprehension, that vocabulary piece. And those are things that, using our adopted materials in the course of a reading block, we don't have time, unfortunately, to have a group of kids doing a chapter book thing, but knowing that they get to go and they get to do that 4 days a week for 30 minutes, they are getting some really great enrichment, and those kids love it. They'll come back and be like, we're reading this awesome chapter book, and they'll tell you about it, or they'll be like, we read, you know, we did like Sylvester the Magic Pebble, just like a really great classic book, and they're just super into it. And then it's not just being read to them, which picture books normally are. They're getting to really read it and really dive into it. So it's been a really great way of reaching those kids that need a little bit of enrichment.
That's awesome. And this is going off script a little bit. So thinking about parents and families and support people in a student's lives, like how do we engage them in Walk to Read and then just literacy efforts in general?
I actually am very lucky because Walk to Read takes a lot of people. So I have 2 retired educators that come in and help me twice a week.
I love that.
And they
Thank you to the retired educators. Everywhere I go, like I feel like they're just such heroes in our schools because I bump into them all the time and they're like, we're coming back to help you out. So shout out to all the retired educators out there that are helping us out.
But it's great because it takes my small group of 15 and then we divide it out and we get to have a small group of 5. So without the extra staff members in our building, we were really able to get a smaller group, and those retired educators get to see kids because, you know, they desperately miss seeing the kids. So that's just one way that I have been doing it. We also have parent volunteers that come into our building that help with Walk to Read as well.
That's excellent. Yeah, one of the critiques, and I've said this before on the podcast, but I have to repeat it because it always just makes me laugh. The Department of Ed, when they were looking at our reading plan at the beginning of the year, they critiqued our group sizes, and it's like, Yep. If we had more resources, if we had more financial backing from the state, our resources could drastically lower. But without that,
Right.
we're kind of stuck with the group sizes that we have unless we're able to pull in volunteers. And so volunteers really do help us out with our interventions. But it's definitely not a replacement for an increase to the BSA or local funding. So
Absolutely
a plug
not.
for that, because that truly could help our intervention strategies with our early education students.
Absolutely.
Walk to Read in terms of culture and climate, we talked a little bit about it, but anything else to add there of things that you've seen in your school and improvements in culture and climate?
Yeah, I love Walk to Read for like kids and reading, but I also love it for the culture and what it does for a staff, because we tend to be really busy and we sort of hide away in our corners because we've got things to do. But when you're sharing kids and you're meeting regularly to talk about those kids, you end up forming deeper relationships with your colleagues. And then you realize, hey, this is a tough kid. Like, let's talk about him. And then you can all sort of have that conversation and really help each other. And, oh, I tried this or I tried this and this worked or this didn't work. And just the ability to bounce ideas off of each other. Or, hey, this doesn't really seem to be what, this student needs. How else could we help him? And you just start having those conversations and you just start working even more together. And it really makes you feel like you're a part of this kind of team of educators with that common goal of helping those kiddos. But the relationships really build in that process.
Yeah, awesome. Something I was thinking about as we were having this conversation, I imagine there'll be some educators out there that are at other schools, whether it be teachers or principals, and then educators around the state that might have similar programs in place, but curious if you have any takeaways from your schools of either lesson learned that you could help people prevent mistakes as they're potentially building this in their schools, or some tips of things that you're like, if you do these 3 things, like it'll make your Walk to Read so much better.
We have learned, because we have been doing Walk to Read for years prior to Alaska Reads Act, but we have learned over the years that you really have to group the students based on what they need, but then also give the teacher to the group that will fit the best with that group. Like, you have to play with the teacher's strengths. Like, some teachers are more apt for chapter books and some teachers are more apt for teaching phonics. So you have to just let it go, and it's only 30 minutes and you let it go and you pair the teacher with the students and what everybody needs.
Love that. Great piece of advice.
And I think thinking through the logistics, like sometimes we're like, okay, we know where everybody's going, we're ready. And it's like, no, we're not ready. Because do you have a list ready to hang up to show students where they're going? And do you have like the list in case there's a fire drill during Walk to Read?
Yeah.
Like, you need that stapled to your like normal attendance emergency paperwork at your door, like those little things. Or how are the kids getting? We're walking with 3rd grade, so we're just on different sides of the building. So, okay, how are we going to shuffle kids across the building? They're going to go this way, they're going to go this way. The first 2 days, this adult's going to take them. So just not thinking, okay, the spreadsheet's good, we're good to go, but actually thinking through those logistics. And we have a parent letter that we have sent for years. We did Walk to Read back in the day with like reading first, and then we had different structures of it kind of over the years, but we always send a parent letter that explains what we're doing, what Walk to Read is, and how the groups are. Like, kids reading this spread of words is going to this teacher and doing this. And I feel like that takes a ton of question or concern off of parents, because you know exactly the support your kid is getting or the enrichment your kiddo's getting, and the teacher they're going to do it with. And I just feel like that open line of communication is really important.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you touched on the logistics piece, because I know this is one of the things, and shout out to Heather Stewart at Ryan Middle School, as they were starting to implement their Walk to Read program. They started with logistics first, and a ton of conversations around the logistics and walking through some of the things before, even diving into the literacy piece, just to make sure that they had that nailed down. And, it can get pretty complicated in terms of students shuffling different places and stuff. So glad to hear you calling that out, because I do think that's an important piece as schools and administrators are putting something similar in place for their schools. So any kind of final thoughts on Walk to Read that we want to discuss today?
I just want to really hit home that it really is beneficial for students, that it really gives them what they need. Like our reading block is great, but that's grade level curriculum, and not every student can access grade level curriculum, or they need more. So it's just a great time. And I know some teachers are very protective of their time, but it's just 30 minutes, 4 days a week that you aren't necessarily giving up. You're adding to your day and giving kids what they really need.
And on that note, I look at it as it's actually easier for me because I plan and prep for my walk to read group as our 4 or 5 other teachers. I couldn't do all that, just me with 30 minutes. Even if I added 30 minutes a day to my classroom and I had the best of intentions, I'm not going to be able to have kids on chapter books, kids on UFly, kids on Read Live, like all of these different interventions. Like I like to think I'm amazing, but I can't do all of that.
Well, you guys are amazing. But yeah, that differentiation is super tough to have.
It makes it really manageable to meet all of those needs.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much again for doing what you're doing day in and day out with our students. You truly are leaders in our school district. And so thank you for that. And thank you for your willingness to come in and talk on the podcast about Walk to Read. And I'm sure the viewers have picked up a lot of tips and tricks, and hope to have you back on in the future next year as we continue to progress and hear how it's going in your schools. And so just thank you so much. Again, this is Dr. Meinert with the Alaska EdVenture podcast. And thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for embarking on this Alaska EdVenture with us. Hit that subscribe button and we'll meet you on the next episode.